Dick Grayson. Robin?
The Flying Graysons. Tony Zuko.
Yes. On my Earth, you took me in after my parents' murder. Trained me. I became your partner.
That seems terribly irresponsible.
Maybe.
Welcome to the Superhero Cinephiles podcast. I'm your host, Perry Constantine, and it's a DC animation episode, so we've got Stacy Dooks back. Stacy, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. It's great to be back. It has been a minute since we've sat down and talked about it, but everybody, we're going to make up for lost time.
Well, in that spirit, why don't you remind people about who you are?
Oh, well, I'm Stacy Dooks. I am a podcaster and occasional freelance writer. I am a podcaster with my brother, Ryan. We do the Fanboy Power Hour podcast every Wednesday on your favorite podcast provider of choice. We talk nerdity, just general pop culture, the occasional movies. We recently went and saw Alien Romulus and took that in. We had some thoughts. We thought, overall, very, very good until the last 10 minutes happened. And we were like, mostly okay, but you want an honest man's opinion. Like, it was so good, and then it just kind of fumbled the bag. But that's our opinion. If you enjoyed it, more power to you. So, but yeah, and we just generally do that. And I occasionally write, and I hang around on Blue Sky, and come for the nerdity, stay for the socialist hot takes. So, absolutely.
I have not seen Romulus yet. I was not very enthused about it after Covenant, so I'm like, maybe I'll. But then I heard a lot of people saying it's really good. So,
it's 2/3 of it is good. It's good. I mean, granted, all of the cast are like CW style. Yeah, they're so young. I felt personally attacked as a gentleman of some vintage. But once the plot got moving, everything was great. And then there's just this one part where I could feel the hand of Ridley Scott on the shoulder of the production, and I was like, oh no. And if they just left that reference well enough alone, that would have been fine. But things happen near the end, is all I'm saying. Just be ready for that last 10 minutes if you're going to go in. If you want to spend the full price, you could do that. I mean, 2/3 of it is great. But if you want to wait for streaming, that's fine too. Like, it's easily my third favorite Alien movie for that first 2/3 where it's really good. There is another instance of like, I want to get your feedback on it because there's something in there that happens where my brother and I were both like, this feels kind of like real world kind of creepy, but I'll wait for you to see it and then we can talk. If we ever do an Aliens Romulus thing.
Yeah, I will probably be waiting until it comes to streaming.
Yeah,
although
no
I
rush.
did talk a little bit about Aliens on another podcast. I was on my buddy Derek's underrated podcast and talked about Alien 3, which I still maintain is really solid, especially the assembly cut.
It's not for me. My brother speaks up the assembly cut, all day long, and I'm sure it's great. But I initially took the ride. Heck, I owned the novelization by Alan Dean Foster because I needed more answers. I needed closure, and I looked to Alan to help me, and it just didn't satisfy me. But to the people who like it, no worries. My personal headcanon is that the first two movies happened, and then anything that you don't want to incorporate into your headcanon are just Ripley's dreams and hypersleep.
It's a nice way of looking at it.
That's my Marvel no prize way of looking at it.
And so what kind of stuff is interesting you lately? Obviously, you saw Romulus, but anything else that's grabbing your interest these days?
Well, I'm going to be sitting down and watching Rings of Power this week, season 2. So I think that's going to be interesting. The first season I generally liked overall. It is kind of a bit of a bummer with everything being a prequel these days, but I'm interested to see how they kind of bring it in for a continuation in season 2. And I watched the entirety. My brother and I have watched the entirety of the first season of Batman Caped Crusader on Amazon, which was quite good. I mean, I initially thought, well, I don't know, is this just going to be a reheated Batman the Animated Series? Is this going to be? But it's actually a bit more interesting because they incorporate a lot of the comics people, like Ed Brubaker is a producer and kind of like the head writer on it. So if you're looking for like a GCPD kind of like GCPD meets the Untouchables meets, the Batman, you're gonna have a good time. And the young man they got to play Batman, whose name escapes me at the moment, is quite good in the role. So it's interesting. It's definitely period, and there's been a couple instances where I've noticed in like reporter shots that there is a character in the crowd that looks very much like the Max Fleischer Lois Lane,
Hmm.
and I'm like, yeah, you keep teasing me, show. I see what you're doing. And then at one point she has a red-haired photographer with her, and I'm like, you are Bruce. Don't toy with my emotions. I mean, I have been enjoying my adventures with Superman. That's a great show. But man, if we could get those original Bruce Timm designs for Superman the animated series and get them translated into like that milieu that they're doing, which is like sort of 1940s, but not quite, man, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, I saw some people talking about that online, like
Mhm.
speculating if whether or not they would have like a more Flesher style, Golden Age Superman pop
Yeah,
up in
yeah. Just
season.
pop up in a guest appearance. Yeah. Be
I haven't
super
seen
fun.
the full season yet. I'm like about
Mhm.
halfway through, but I've really liked what
Yeah.
I've seen so far. And
Mhm.
My Adventures with Superman season 2 is on my list. I've got to make time to watch that as well.
Oh man, you are gonna have a good time.
Mm.
It's so good. That last episode of season two just left me like pump your fist good. Like just like they got it so right. I mean, Superman has been eating well these past couple years between Superman and Lois and My Adventures with Superman and just the stuff that we're going to be talking about in this episode. Like Superman's been doing has been eating pretty well lately, and I'm very chuffed at all the love the character's been getting. Sometimes it feels like DC tends to forget that their flagship character is not Batman.
Hmm.
He's the
Yeah.
other guy. Yeah. So I mean, I know that Marvel has done the same thing where they like positioned Iron Man as their main guy, but we all know it's Spider-Man.
Yeah.
He's the Mickey Mouse of the whole organization, ironic.
Mhm.
So, it's nice to see
Yeah.
Superman back.
Yes, I've been really liking that, Len. And not only that, but also the Superman comics have been really good these days
Oh,
too. I mean, I
Philip
uh I
Kennedy
just
Johnson. Yeah.
Philip Kennedy Johnson, his stuff was amazing. And I just read this. So, guys, if you're wondering why I'm talking about the same thing twice, because from the last episode, because we recorded the last episode just a few hours ago. So that's why I haven't discovered a whole lot of new stuff in those few hours. But I'd mentioned that I'd read the second volume of Joshua Williamson's Superman run, which is
Yeah.
The Chained,
Super
and it
core.
was really
Yeah,
good
yeah.
too. Yeah, and
Hmm.
I'm still not so sold on the big like expanded Superman family type stuff, like that kind. I feel
Yeah,
like that's kind
Power
of
Girl
it's
baffling. Yeah, if I'm
that
being
too. Yeah,
honest. Sorry, didn't mean to step
um,
on.
but also like I don't know. I still, and I talked about this. I think I mentioned this before on the show, but I'm kind of disappointed that they had aged up John Kent when a lot of the stuff they're doing with John Kent actually would have worked really well with Connor, like the whole bisexuality thing, especially with him and Tim and all those fan discussions all those years. I think a lot of that stuff would have worked so much better with Connor, and then you could have had John and like the young kid role.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. Unfortunate, with the whole. Thankfully, I think recent events have shown that they've kind of quietly broomed the Bendis Legion kind of off the table. And I think, it was a good solid crack at the bat, but unfortunately, there were some unfortunate implications, especially with Saturn Girl's character, where Saturn Girl had basically almost become as bad as Wally was in Heroes in Crisis, where she basically wanted to date Jonathan Kent so bad that she might have accidentally telepathically brainwashed everyone else in the team to want to bring John to the future. And it's just like,
Oof.
that doesn't read well. That reads kind of creepy. So yeah,
Yeah.
that was a thing where it's like, we'll probably just quietly ignore that. I do agree the age jump was a bit much. I mean, to be fair, Tom Taylor played the ball where it lay when he took over
Yeah.
as Superman, son of Kal-El, which was a good run. And there was, John is a great character, but he did unfortunately have the side effect of kind of leaving Connor as a man without a country. I mean, I appreciate Bendis
Yeah.
bringing Connor back. That was great, but unfortunately, I did enjoy the Superboy title with Connor, where he goes off to space and kind of like almost forms a proto legion of superheroes with these aliens that he encounters, and it's a pretty fun book. But yeah, he's kind of he's kind of drifting. He's kind of in a limbo state. It's kind of like Tim Drake also. Like
Hmm.
they're there and they're in the big crowd scenes, and you love to see them whenever they show up, but like it's just kind of like having an extra action figure of a figure you already have, and you're like trying to play, and like I think the creators sometimes struggle with what to do with them.
Yeah, it's especially disappointing for me because when I really started getting into DC's comics line, it was Young Justice was one of those first books that I started picking up. And so like,
Mhm.
Connor and Tim and Impulse and, the whole crew there, that was like my Teen Titans. So I was really kind of disappointed when they all just kind of like got shuffled away.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It was a bummer. You know, the new 52 was an experiment that was kind of kind of had inbuilt flaws to begin with because it was supposed to be a clean break, but let's import all the Batman stuff and all the Green Lantern stuff because that stuff's popular and sells. So we won't change anything there, but we'll make baffling decisions like make Superman and Wonder Woman a couple, which we'll talk about later. And
Mhm.
the whole thing of like, Superman has armor and it's just like and Batman has like boots with little bat symbols on them, which seem like, look, Jim, I love you, but buddy, you're getting a little out into the reeds.
I remember him. I think he was doing an interview when he was talking about that, like how he had done all that detail on the Batman boots and the cover of the first issue of Hush when he did that run of Batman, and how much it annoyed him after he realized his mistake because that he had to keep fucking drawing it over and over again.
Every Spider-Man artist who followed Ditko was
Hmm.
probably like, did he have to cover the entire suit with that cross stitching? I
Or
think
then
that's one of the reasons. Yeah,
or then when McFarlane did the spaghetti webbing, and then every artist was expected to do the same thing.
to do the homage. Yeah, exactly. I
Yeah.
got to think that Mike Zeck was like, okay, we're going to design a Spider-Man suit. It's just black. It's black with some white highlights. That's it. He's easiest to
And
draw.
barely
Just
any
use all
highlights. A
the.
lot of time it's just like
Yeah,
pure negative space. It's
just
just
a
like the
pure
Havoc
negative. Yeah.
thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Crazy.
Um, although speaking of Jim Lee and 90s designs and stuff like that, I've been reading Alan Moore's Supreme run recently. I'd mentioned that on a previous episode, and been digging it, and it also kind of made me nostalgic for some of the old Image stuff. So I went back and I
Yeah.
started dipping back into the original Wildcats run, and
Mhm.
it's fun going back and revisiting it.
Mhm. Look, man, say what you will about the early Image comics in terms of quality. I mean, like, they were artists primarily. So
Mhm.
the visuals were always striking. And, they did take a crack at the bat and give Jim credit where it's due. Give Rob credit where it's due. Of all the people to get Alan Moore, who had said, a good day to you all, to come back to comics, Rob Liefeld, ladies and gentlemen. I would I would kill for a documentary, some kind of fly on wall. What did he say? I mean, it must have been a dump truck full of money, first of all. But what did he say to just get him to come back to superheroes after he'd been like, I'm done, man, I'm done. And he's been the James Brown. He's kind of like had the cape thrown over him and gone off stage a couple of times, but that initial comeback, like crazy to think about.
It's weird. I was thinking about this too as I was reading Supreme because I was wondering like
Hmm.
what not only did Rob say to him, but what did Rob say when Alan told him his pitch? And he's basically like, we're going to ignore everything you did because it's all bullshit.
Yeah, it's not good. Rob, between you, me, and the lamppost, come on, we all know. We all know Supreme is not getting over. I'm sorry, as it stood. I mean, I bought the initial first issue. I read a couple issues going in when Keith Giffen took over for a while,
Mhm.
and Supreme went insane and thought he was a god, and then he had Thor's hammer for a little bit, and there was some crazy stuff going on there. And then there was that crossover issue with Gladiator that they did where Supreme fought Gladiator from the Imperial Guard of the Shi'ar. That was a
Oh,
pretty fun issue, but for the most part, nobody had an idea what to do. The whole premise was, what if Superman but a egotistical jerk?
mhm.
And it just didn't take. So Moore's idea is so interesting where it's like, yeah, but what if this character was just the 90s version of essentially Superman? And we come to realize that all versions of this character have existed over the entirety. And every time that, like in our universe, they get rebooted, it's a revision, and they all end up in this pocket dimension limbo. So
Mhm.
crazy to think about.
It was, and his Wildcat stuff. I haven't gotten back to rereading that since I
Mm.
first read it back in the day. But when he basically said, yeah, this whole central concept of the book, it's always been a lie. So,
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I imagine Jim probably would have been a little bit more, amenable to that kind of big
Mhm.
changes. But I do wonder, because Liefeld's got such an ego. What did he say when Moore gave him this pitch?
I think I think he probably just sat down with Rob and was like, "Look, man, just give me a year. We'll try this on. If you want me to do anything else, sure, but let me show you what I can do." And then
Hmm.
that the story of the year is like I liken it to multiversity in just that the ambition of it and the scope of it is so cool. And it would have been so interesting to see where that would have led. Because then there was Supreme the Return, and they were make that one issue with like Wild Bill Hickok. Like, Jesus Christ, when he gets Gil Kane to do the flashback sequences,
Now, I haven't gotten
Christ
full
alive.
throughout the whole thing
Oh
yet, so I
man,
haven't gotten
you
there
you
yet.
are
So
in for a treat. When you get to Supreme the Return, you're in for a treat. Supreme the
okay.
story of the year is that first arc where it sets up
Mm.
the supremacy, Ethan Crane, young Supreme. Like there's a whole bunch of stuff. And of course, Suprema, who is just like easily my favorite character because she's just so light and bubbly and silver agey, but there's like this undercurrent. Just like she's just ditching on people. It's incredible. You're gonna have a
I'm gonna have
fun
to.
time with
I'm looking forward to it. I also saw
it.
that because I did a bit of a deep dive into the awesome stuff that he was doing back then,
Mm.
and found out that his Youngblood relaunch. It only had like one issue or something like
It only
that,
had one
but
issue. It spun out of the Judgment Day crossover. And if
right.
you get that, read that, come back to me. Yeah,
Here's something I
I'll await your
found though.
text.
Did
Mhm.
you know that because the scripts had been published or had been released or something,
For
and
Youngblood?
yes, and some people went in and they finished the fucking comic.
Stop it.
Yes, I'm serious. I'll
Stop it.
remind me after we're done. I'll
Okay,
talk
yeah.
about sending it to you. I
I'm
haven't
all
even looked at
curiosity.
them yet, so
Yeah.
but yeah, someone I read that online. They said that, oh yeah, someone had done these as comics based off the
Yeah.
scripts, and even like a kind of a fanfic version based on like his notes, and like finished like a complete run of it.
That would be dope. Yeah. More people should do that. Like take like a Steve Englehart Batman script and just try to do your own take on like Deadshot.
Mhm.
Swing for the fences. Go nuts. Like that would be
Yeah,
super
yeah.
fun.
But anyway, so today we are talking about Justice League Crisis on Infinite Earths Trilogy. So we're talking about all three parts here today. And this is I don't know, this is a weird package, I felt overall. Like
Hmm.
it's I don't feel like it doesn't feel as epic as what I'd expect, like the Crisis story. It feels like it's like these smaller stories set around the time of Crisis. And it just didn't,
Yeah.
and some of the stuff here just made me think, like, I just feel like a lot of this movie, and this is kind of like my big takeaway of it, is a lot of missed opportunities because they finished the previous universe with Justice League Dark Apocalypse,
Mm.
and then they decide they're going to reboot the whole thing, and they're going to create a
Hmm.
new shared universe. And
Hmm.
so then we get this new one, and we get a few films in, right? We get Long Halloween, we get Man of
Yep.
Tomorrow, um, Legion of Superheroes was one of them, I think.
Beware of my power. Yeah.
Yeah, Beware My Power, the Green Lantern one, Justice Society, which we had you on last time to talk about,
Yeah.
and then Warworld, which I have, but I haven't seen yet, and then
Haven't watched that one yet.
we jump right into Crisis on Infinite Earths, and it's just like it was a really odd choice to do that instead of like because and this is my bugaboos with what DC's been doing with animation ever since that New 52 style universe is the idea of we're going to take these stories, these iconic stories, and instead of doing them the way we used to do, like Dark Knight Returns or like Superman, Batman, Public Enemies, or even like, Superman Unbound, which is the based on the Brainiac storyline,
Mm.
or Superman versus the Elite, where we adapted the whole story and we tried to find like in some cases, a good art style to match the story. Superman versus the Elite is a different story on that one. Um, but now we're going to take all these stories and we're going to try and fit them into this shared continuity universe. So they did that with the Hush storyline. They did that with Death and Return of Superman. And they did that with Long Halloween and this new universe they set up. And now they do it with Crisis on Infinite Earths. And it just feels like a missed opportunity when A, you've just built this universe and now you're ending it already. And B, you could have done this as something a lot more special if you had just adapted the original Crisis into something that was more in line with that original series. I don't know. You're a much bigger fan of Crisis than I am. So what were kind of your big thoughts when you finished watching
Well,
this?
overall, I did like it. I mean, I did have a couple of quibbles, but I do feel that, you know, I think that this came about, I think also partially because James Gunn has come along and it's like, well, we're going to bring everything under one banner, including the animated projects such as,
Creature
Creature
Commandos?
Commandos, that kind of stuff. So I think that this kind of came along at a point where I think they were about to like try to streamline everything and do like maybe another take or maybe get things lined up for that new universe. But I do feel that, coming to Crisis and realizing that a trail of breadcrumbs had been left from Man of Tomorrow all the way through Warworld to these movies was actually fairly interesting. Like they began with the ending in mind. Like they knew that everything was going to build to Crisis. Now, whether or not they had any plans afterward, I'm not sure. But I did like it, and I did like some of the choices they made, like the stuff with Pariah, where they made Pariah into John Constantine, which is a good idea. Because look, I'm going to be 100% real with you. Pariah is just a nothing burger. There's nothing there. He's just there to show up, witness the world die, and cry. And then he poofs away. And then there's nothing to it. There's nothing to him. So, and merging Supergirl and Harbinger was an interesting idea in terms of like, we meet Supergirl in Legion of Superheroes. She goes off and has her adventure. But over the course of the story, we get more context to things we saw elsewhere that now we get to see the payoff to, like Justice League, or Justice Society, World War II. We get to revisit the characters on Earth too, when they've aged. It's like when the JSA showed up in that one sequence, I was like, "Oh, hey guys, it's good to see you again." It's like Matt Mercer doing Our Man and Jay Garrick, and like Dinah Lance is older now and has her daughter also named Dinah, who's also Black Canary. That was pretty cool. I've got a lot more to talk about when we get into part three, but when we got to part one, I thought part one was very well done, and I liked the change they made with the Flash because, Flash in the comic version of Crisis, he doesn't have a lot of, doesn't have a lot to contribute. He gets kidnapped and imprisoned by the Anti-Monitor and tortured by Psycho Pirate. But in this one, he's actually got a role to play. And more importantly, so does Iris. Like their love and their connection in part one is like the anchor that like helps me to lock into the rest of the story. And, him, dying to save the multiverse and like Amazo, that whole thing, the Justice League being originally a ruse, and then all of a sudden they decide to do it for real. That was interesting. That was a lot of fun. And I think that, a one-to-one adaptation of Crisis on Infinite Earths is impossible because no animation studio, no matter how talented, could match George Perez. Because good Lord, he gives you everything that DC has ever done. It's a continuous game of, hey, it's that person, or hey, it's that guy. You could never do that. Like they play some hints of it in the animation, but it's just not the same. And I think that what they did was they took the spirit of Crisis and the basic framework and they did their own thing with it. Now, is it a perfect 3-point landing? No, I've got some problems with it, particularly in part three. We'll get to that later. But overall, I didn't hate it. I didn't like cross my arms and like get huffy about it. But there were some moments where I was like, you might want to tighten that. Or but all was forgiven in part two, which we'll discuss with the best cameo that made this nerd sit bolt upright in his chair and go, "Holy shit, you got to be kidding me!" So we'll get to that when we get to that.
And one
Yeah,
of the things
so
that
overall I
confused me,
like
and I, yeah, one of the things that confused me had to do with
it.
just because the first, and again, I had not seen War World, so I think that's probably where a lot of my confusion came from with this, because it it picks up in the first movie with the end of Hush, when Flash and Green Arrow go to Wayne Manor, and just like the Justice League, they end up forming after that. And one of the things that I found interesting was there's no Wonder Woman here. And I could be
Mm.
wrong, but wasn't Wonder Woman part of the cast in Warworld? Because I could have sworn she was on the cover.
She is, but I think it's the Wonder Woman from Earth 2.
Oh,
Like I
okay.
think they get plucked out of the reality because in Legion of Superheroes, Clark and Bruce get Zeta beamed ostensibly to Warworld, and then they end up in these virtual reality kind of situations like you see in the trailer to Warworld. Like Batman's hanging out with Travis Morgan. Clark is in this like 1950s like B movie alien thing, and
Mhm.
Diana is in the Old West. And so, and Mongols like behind it all, and they eventually, good triumphs over evil, et cetera, et cetera. And that kind of leads up into where World ends up in Crisis. And Jean Jones is also involved there as well.
Mhm.
So yeah, so yeah, I think that's interesting. And I understand like any issues with like part one because part one was initially confusing to me because we're time skipping all over the joint. Like we're the story is being told out of chronological sequence because Barry is existing at all points in his time stream. So, and apparently this is something that he has been living through in the Tomorrowverse just day to day. Like Iris even talks about it. Oh, you were decades
Mhm.
away or something, right? And it's just like, okay. And on one level, that is kind of interesting because, speedsters and time travel in DC Comics go together like cookies and milk. So it would be natural for a being like the Flash, whose body already moves at like damn near light speed, for his brain to just be like, zip zapping all through timelines and all through his personal history. So that was an interesting wrinkle, I think, and I think that they played that quite well. So I'm just trying to remember the name of the gentleman who played the Flash, Matt Bomer. Yeah, he did
Mhm.
a great job. Yeah.
He also did Superman in Superman Unbound, which we talked about a few episodes ago,
Hmm.
and he was also Negative Man on Doom Patrol.
Really
Yeah,
nice.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, I
So
all the bandages, so you don't really get to see him except in brief snippets. So you might have
no,
just slipped
no.
away from me.
Oh, I kind of lost the train of thought here because I forgot to ask
Mm.
you before we jumped into the movie was
Hmm.
what's your history with this storyline in general?
With the storyline. Well, to me, as a kid reading comics in the 1980s, I mean, I was coming up during the late Bronze Age, where like, Gil Kane had his run on Action Comics with possibly the greatest issue of DC Comics presents of Action Comics of all time, which was the one against Skelebot Brainiac, where Gil Kane debuted Brainiac's Skelebot form, where he wasn't the green-skinned alien anymore. He was the skeletal robot with like the head spaceship shaped like his head. And it was a team up between Superman, the Justice League, and the new Teen Titans, which was just ridiculous. It was one of the greatest like single issues of comics ever. And then what? Kurt Swan was generally the Superman artist of my youth. So when whatever happened to the Man of Tomorrow, which was the last Superman stories before we jumped into Crisis, came along, like I was confused at first because I was like, is Superman done? Like, are we finished here? Like, did we wrap everything up? And then Crisis came along and showed that like Kara had died and Flash died. And like, I didn't really read all the issues at the time. Like, I dipped in and out. Like, I was the kid in the transitional phase between the old DC and the new DC. And then when Man of Steel #1 dropped with John Byrne, that was transformative. That was a lightning bolt. And then you had Batman Year One, the George Perez Wonder Woman, like everything was launching. So it was an interesting period. And Crisis was one of those things where it was just like it was a thing that they ostensibly said they needed to do because people would be confused about the real Superman. But stuff like All Star Squadron opened with the same brief thing where it's like, this is Earth 2. This is the world where superheroes debuted in like the 1930s, and like here's the world that they're on. This is not the same Earth, and like the Justice Society and Justice League would cross over all the time. Like nobody was really confused about the multiverse, but they just felt like, I guess the new editorial wanted to be like fully new brooms and just kind of sweep away anything that seemed extraneous. And the multiverse just seemed like that. Pare it down to one universe, get it like lean and mean. But damn if it didn't last a year before all that stuff started creeping back in. Supergirl, Crypto, Phantom Zone criminals, like all this kind of stuff. It would all start to bleed back in. And so the constant thing of DC Comics is like pick a lane. Like, are you gonna do the multiverse or are you not gonna do the multiverse? We'll talk about that more as we get into part three, because there's a moment in there where my notes just read nope, no, wrong, incorrect. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think Derek and I talked about this long back when we talked about the CW's Crisis story. And I came to Crisis much later. Like I had heard about Crisis and all that, and I had heard that it was a reboot of the DC universe, and then I was very confused because I'm like, well, wait a minute, how come this stuff is from pre-Crisis and it seems to be still there, but this other stuff is not from pre-Crisis? So I was very confused by that when I started getting into the comics. And so then I read Crisis. Actually, Bernie Gersmeyer, who's been a guest on the show before, he was my teacher when I was in high school. And he, I don't even think they had a trade out for it at the time, but he let me borrow his entire like 12 issues of the Crisis comic. And so I read the whole thing. And this is when I had just started getting into DC. So I did not really understand like 90% of it, probably. But then I read it again a few years ago and it made a lot more sense to me. And I think it is a good story. But yeah, it does kind of feel like one of those things, like whenever studio executives get like start, undermining the intelligence, it really kind of felt like that was the situation that we were dealing with, because sorry about that, guys. My son muted my microphone for a brief minute there.
All good.
But so one of the things that I was trying to that they were doing was, like, for example, when they said we can't have Bruce Wayne on Smallville because Batman is for the movies and people are going to be confused. It's like, you're doing Smallville with a young Clark Kent in the modern day, while you're also doing Superman Returns, which is about an old Clark Kent in the modern day, and is also a sequel to Superman 2. So how come they'd be confused if young Batman appears on Smallville, but they won't be confused with these two different Supermen running around? So it's just like these really bizarre rules that DC and Warner Brothers as well have about these characters, where they're like, I don't know if people are going to follow that, because I think Crisis actually made things more confusing than anything else.
Yes, it really did. Kind of like it's the DC universe is a well-maintained series of islands that have interconnective like causeways that allow things to move back and forth. But when you do things like Crisis, you essentially ask the centipede, how do you walk? And it just trips all over itself and the whole machine just grinds to a screeching halt. And like instances like this remind me of when Dan DiDio was the new broom at DC, and he kind of discontinued all the Elseworlds because he was concerned about people getting confused about who the real Batman was. And I was like, Dan, bud, you might want to sit down. I've got some news for you about Batman. He's not real, sweetie. It doesn't matter. Like you can, and like these characters are such malleable concepts that things like Elseworlds and like playing around with multiple Earths doesn't matter, because they're such fun to play with those toys. And I think a lot of creators like to do like a Black Label Adam Strange series, for better or for worse, and stuff like that, where they can play around with the toys and make changes that in the mainstream wouldn't actually work. But if we just make it a parallel Earth, if we just make it an Earth where Batman gets bitten by Dracula and becomes a vampire, or Batman gets a Green Lantern power ring, or Batman is, in the 19th century instead of the 20th. Let's stuff with Batman. Batman is one of the most malleable. Like he's like Silly Putty. You can just put him on anything, and he'll just drop Batman into most anything. He'll be great. But yeah, Crisis, I think, back as a comic was definitely a sign that we had moved from kids buying comics to a generation that had grown up reading those comics and were now making the comics and now wanted to make everything make sense in a world of, make believe stories primarily intended for children, good or ill.
Yeah, and I think that and like I said, they just it ended up complicating things a lot more because when I was reading stuff and I get into comic, like all the stuff with Donna Troy now, it's like, okay, so how many different times have we had the Who is Donna Troy story because nobody knows how to fit her into stuff anymore. Or
Mm-hmm.
the my favorite was the in the 90s in Superman books where they were so adherent to John Byrne's idea that Superman is the only survivor of Krypton, but then they want to do stories with Supergirl and Zod, so they have to bring in, so Supergirl is, a protoplasmic being from a pocket dimension, and
Who's
Zod
also an
is
angel.
who's also an angel, an Earthborn angel, yeah, and then Zod is from a pocket dimension, and then he is from another pocket dimension, and then there's this
Nuts with the pocket dimension.
this child of Pakolistani astronauts who it's just like,
Brother,
just let him use the Kryptonians.
just let him have that little cap and he's General Zod. Like, who are we kidding right now? Like,
Mhm.
you can call him Jack Zur in Superman the Animated Series, but we all know who that was supposed to
Yeah.
be. Just let Zod be Zod. Let Bartlett be Bartlett. Let Zod be Zod. Come on, let's just. Who are we kidding? Yeah, it's just, sometimes I think, like, you get an amazing stable of creative people at like DC and Marvel, and sometimes they're so eager to try to explain how things work. It makes it stuff like that makes it infinitely more complicated than it needs to be. Where you're in such a hurry to explain how the machine works that you've literally jammed up the gears trying to explain the intricacies of it. So,
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. It's like take like you watch like my son here, he's taking apart the toy and he breaks it, and then it's just like, fix it. It's like, okay, well, we wouldn't be in this problem if you didn't have to take it apart in the first place. um and yeah, and so now going back to this movie,
mhm.
now that first part, one of the things that struck me as I'm watching it is I'm like, we are spending a lot of time on forming this new Justice League and this battle with Amazo and all this. And it made me
Mhm.
think, I'm like, maybe you guys should have just done this as a movie first and then done Crisis later. Like, if you're, I mean, I get maybe time was of the essence here, but I think if you're
Mhm.
gonna, we could have spent less time on that kind of stuff and more time on, bringing all these different Earths together and more time adapting the basics of the story. So I felt like that was kind of,
Mhm.
we're in wheel spinning territory a little bit.
Oh, absolutely. I think that I'm not sure. I don't have any hard information, but I have to think that while this movie probably was in the early stages of development, they were planning on doing like a Justice League movie and then maybe some other stuff to establish like there's a team, they've got the Hall of Justice, they've got like, they're building the Tomorrowverse version of the Justice League. But I have to think that maybe during the early development of this project, they were building to Crisis. They put the Easter eggs in, but they were like, oh, well, that'll be for like a year or so out once we've established the Justice League and had a couple adventures with them. Maybe adapt like the Hyper Clan story or something. That would be really cool. Jensen Ackles Batman being like, I know your secret. That shit would have been the most metal
Mhm.
thing ever. But I think that maybe they just got the message from on high that, nah, man, we're shuttering it. We're closing it out. So Crisis will be your last hurrah. And so they were like, well, we got enough budget for maybe 3 movies, so let's just get in there. We'll do the 3-parter. We'll bring the curtain down and tee up maybe the next universe. Like, who knows what'll happen in the new James Gunn era. So that's my only theory that I can think of just off the top of my head. Take it with a grain of salt, but that's
No, I
just
think
my
that makes a
thinking.
lot of sense because, I was, because even the lineup is an interesting choice of lineup if you're going to be doing the Crisis movie. Because if you're forming the
Hmm.
Justice League to go up against Crisis, you think you'd probably form, the classic Big Seven or something like that. Instead, they
Hmm.
form a team with, you don't have Diana there, you don't have Hal or any Green Lantern there, but
Hmm.
you've got Ollie there instead, and then you have Vixen there as well.
Which was a cool
So
idea.
which is an interesting idea. Yeah, definitely.
Hmm.
But it's not the idea you would do if you planned on, if this was your only if this was your plan from the start, was to just form this team to
Mhm.
go up against Crisis. It feels like that's the team you form if you are doing a Justice League movie, and then this kind of
Yeah.
like got folded into that.
Because the whole plot with Amazo and Lex Luthor and establishing like it's stealing powers and it's doing stuff like, and it was tied to Man of Tomorrow because the core of Amazo is leftover biomatter from Parasite. Like
Mm.
that's how he gets his power to drain, is from the genetic material from Parasite. So that was interesting. And I think that would have been made for a good first adventure, or maybe they could have worked in like they deal with Amazo and like Starro shows up or something, and then more heroes come out of the woodwork, and so they expand the roster, and we go from the Hall of Justice is their Earth embassy, and then they've got the satellite, so that could be fun. But it's just a little puzzling. I mean, again, the first movie holds together reasonably well. There wasn't a moment where I was like, checking my phone or checking the time to see how long it was. It was good. There's definitely some choices that were made that were different, and it's just we got a long way to go and a short time to get there. So they got to like for 3 movies worth of material, they had to cram a lot of stuff in to provide context for things that would pay off later. And I think
Hmm.
that explains the time skipping because we don't have time to establish all the things that we need to do. We just need you to take it on faith that these characters, because let's face it, like the only people really buying these movies are older gentlemen of a certain vintage like ourselves with a disposable income to be like, I remember Crisis on Infinite Earths. Let me take a sip from the fountain of youth again.
Hmm.
So yeah, so it's we can do the emotional shorthand of like, okay, John and Barry are pretty buddy buddy in the years to come, and like Vixen gets to officiate the wedding, and like they've got a good bunch of friends. The Justice League have become like a pseudo family. And there were even some wrinkles there that were being explored that I was like, man, we should do more with this. Like, where like Bruce Wayne brings Dick Grayson to Barry's house, and he's just like, I'm just gonna drop him off at Central City Orphanage because I'm not gonna raise this kid. You out of
Hmm.
your mind? Like my life is insanely dangerous. Like, and then when Robin shows up at the in there,
Yes.
his whole reaction of like, you were his partner? That sounds insanely reckless.
I was going to mention
Uh,
that too, because
mhm.
yeah, that the movie for me doesn't really pick up until we get Barry going to Earth 3, and then it really starts to get it because
Mhm.
I'm like, okay, now we're getting into
The
the
plot
stuff
has
that I
kicked
came here
off.
for.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. I mean, it it was a long walk to get there, but we are finally getting there, and um and then we get into, and the scene when we have everyone on the space station or the satellite,
Mhm.
and where they introduce Earth 2 Robin and Huntress. Yeah, that Robin scene was perfect because he's
Yeah.
just like, you raised me, you had me, yeah, I was your partner, I fought crime beside you, and he's
He
just
helped a lot of people. Yeah.
yeah, and then Bruce Wayne's just like, that sounds really reckless. What the hell is wrong with this guy?
Yeah, exactly. And then, we meet Huntress, played by the uncomparable Eric Ishii, who also does double duty as Dr. Light. And she's just like, she knows this isn't her dad, but he looks and sounds so much like her dad that's got to be like, oof. Like her dad passed away a couple years before the events of the movie. So it was interesting to have that dynamic where it's just like, this person, this obvious shorthand with them, but they don't know you. Like Jensen Ackles Batman is just like clearly rattled, but he's doing his best not to show it. Where it's like, oh, hey, what? Like I don't do strong emotion. Just like having to deal with there being a Bat family, but he has no emotional context for any of them. It's really cool, especially in part
Yeah,
two where we
yeah,
dwell more.
and his in his reaction to her too, like not only does he not really know how to react, but how he knows right away who her mother is, right? He's just like, you look
Oh
just
yeah.
like her, and I'm just like, oh,
Hmm.
okay, yeah, that was a nice thing to do. We'll be right back after this. Since you're listening to this show, I already know you love watching superhero movies and TV shows, and you just might enjoy superhero comics. But how about superhero novels? I'm giving away 2 free superhero novels and 1 free superhero short story. Visit percivalconstantine.com/SCP to get access to Vanguard, Heroes Forged, the first novel in my own Avengers and X-Men inspired superhero novel series, and Ronin Born, my cyberpunk superhero novel set in a futuristic Japan. I'm also throwing in Fire and Lightning, a free prequel story to my new Power Rangers inspired superhero series Omega Knights. So visit percivalconstantine.com/SCP, those are just the letters SCP, to get started, or click on the link in the show notes. And now, on with the show. Hey guys, I apologize if there's any background noise. My daughter is wants to sing. So if you hear any singing, just consider it background music.
Kid gonna kid. That's all you need to say.
Exactly, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then in Earth 2, yeah, when we have the Bat family there, and including, we get Terry McGinnis in there as well with them.
Yeah, like talk about unexpected but welcome additions. I was like, hey, Batman Beyond, how's it going? Like, it was nice to see Will Friedle don the mantle, the first of a couple of like, oh hey, person I didn't expect to be in this movie. Yeah, so it was good. There's some good bits of business there where, like, he's kind of taking it to Bruce in the same way that he took to old man Bruce. So that was fun to explore. Absolutely.
Well, also just like the fact that this Bruce, the Jensen Ackles one, clearly has no idea how to deal with a Bat family.
Oh no, he's been Batman for basically like a year and change. Like, he didn't enter. He was barely able to wrap the idea of having a partner around his head when Barry is like, hey man, you could probably take this kid under your wing. Like, he could probably handle it. Like, he walks tight ropes. So he's not that fragile. And Batman is just completely like, no. That's not what I'm equipped for. So there you go.
And that's a good point you make about the fact that he's so green in this, because I didn't even think about that. But and when he's barking orders at the rest of the Bat family, you got to figure Robin there, Earth 2 Robin is like, bitch, I've been doing this for like 15 years.
Buddy, I learned all your tricks and then some. I got a stick. Like, I can handle this thing and I can rock your melon with it, as I do when, the hate beams, the hate plague from Transformers the movie 2 starts making everybody go crazy. Yeah, like there's this thing where, like, they all defer to Bruce. When they look at him, they're not seeing him. They're seeing the idealized version of Batman in their heads. And meanwhile, this Batman has made mistakes. Like, he's the one who's like, we got to call in an airstrike to take out Amazo. We can't take chances with this robot that's absorbing powers and is going to kill all the metahuman beings of the Justice League. So I'm going to blow it up. And Flash is like, hey, wait a minute. How about I go talk to his creator, bring his creator over here, and we can kind of Star Trek him without having to employ lethal force. And, like, originally, Batman's like, the Justice League is a horrible idea, but we'll use it as a distraction, as a lure to bring Amazo out into the open. And then by the end of it, he's like, yeah, I'm not perfect, man. Like, I need differing points of view, because otherwise, like Vixen says, like, don't mistake weakness for compassion. And she's like, well, don't mistake brutality for justice, or something along those lines, where it's like, he needs the Justice League. Batman has always needed the Justice League more than the Justice League has needed him, because they're the ones that keep him on the straight and narrow. Because Batman, it's easy to just start slipping. Like, as he says in Under the Red Hood, like, if I kill the Joker, it'd be too damn easy. And then once I start going down that road, I'm never coming back. Yeah, it's interesting. This new Green Batman who's willing to learn. And like, the whole bit where, like, Ollie and Barry bring Clark to his house. And like, it's for you, sir. That bit actually made sense rather than the Long Halloween, because Superman's like, yeah, drive me to my friend's place, because my battery's tapped. And it's just like, and Ollie's just like, wait a minute, Bruce Wayne is Batman? Like, I would have figured it out eventually. And like, Bruce pulls up on the computer, Oliver Queen, like, he's figured it out from the voice and everything. And Ollie's great in that movie. Like, he's just he's so past it, and I love it. Like, he's great. Like, that was a great bit. Ollie's good comic relief in this. Yeah,
I did think that was funny too, the Ollie bit, because it's just like, because the whole it's especially funny because the whole idea of like Green Arrow started off in his Ersatz Batman, and then look at this. He can't even when he's in the man's house, he's just like, wait a second.
It's great. Say what you will about Kevin Smith, a great deal may be said, but Quiver is pretty good. And my favorite bits when Bruce is like, Arrow Cave, Arrow Car, Aeroplane. Ollie, did you have an original idea in your life? Oh, it's
And then,
delightful.
well, bringing back Tom Taylor too, and that when he brings Harley Quinn to the Arrow Cave and in
It's like you should
Injustice,
call it the Quiver.
yeah, arrows don't live in caves. You should call it the Quiver, and he's like, that is a much better idea.
It's actually a pretty good idea. Harley and Ollie in that series are just the best. They are just so not good for each other.
One thing too about this is they actually use Psychopirate because and that was something because when we had the not the original Crisis but the other Crisis, the live action one, there was no Psychopirate or anything like that in that, and it was weird because I remember them teasing him at one point in like one of the previous crossovers or something, and then it wasn't until afterwards when Derek and I were talking about I'm like, hey, wasn't Psychopirate supposed to be teased for this thing?
Yeah, and he spins out of Justice Society World War II because originally we were both puzzled, like, well, this is Psycho Pirate, but he's not in the suit. And he seems real Nazi. And then once again, this Crisis provides you with context that you didn't have when you went through it the first time. So when Psycho Pirate is in that wonderful session with Dr. Fate, and he just lays it all out, like, and you realize, oh my, he's more damaged than we thought he was. He is quite insane. Like that whole sequence in the boarding school and the cops burst in and everyone's hanging from the rafters. All the people who probably resisted him, and then he's got his minions behind him. That was crazy. And that whole bit where he's like, I love Nazis. They're so easy manipulated. It's just like he's got them wrapped around his little finger. He's like, hate and fear, those are easy to manipulate. Compassion, love, altruism, and all that crap. That's the hard stuff. And so, like, and he explains how we got to him taking over Aquaman's empire and making Aquaman into a Nazi who was giving off sea hails. Like that was interesting. Psycho Pirate is genuinely creepy in this series of films. Shout out to Jeffrey Arend, who plays the character. Like he just gives Psycho Pirate this oily quality where it's just like anytime you're hanging around him, it's just like, I want to get away from you. you are not a healthy person. And yeah, it's a great performance. Yeah, really good.
And also we get you'd mentioned the Superman Wonder Woman relationship here, which we get in when they find out that they've hooked up after the Justice Society movie.
Yeah, because basically Steve Trevor passed away in Justice Society, and Superman did meet Lois, and he had a great and long life with her apparently, because the Kryptonian doesn't age or ages very slowly. He's like, we're not immortal, Clark. She is though, because this Wonder Woman is factually immortal to the point that she can survive an antimatter wave. Like she survives when that entire Earth Amazonia just gets ganked, and she's just drifting in space, frozen, because she's the Jack Harkness of this piece. She's an immutable point in time, and you can't mess with her. Like that's the part, and she's just like, I've lived for like thousands of years. I've seen my Amazonian civilization die, and this woman isn't my mother, but she's the closest thing that I have to seeing her again. And like when she hugs Hippolyta, and Hippolyta is just like, okay, this is happening. And it's just like no frame of context for her. It's heartbreaking. So their relationship is interesting. And I like how it plays off of Earth One Superman and his Lois Lane, who remains the GOAT. Like Lois Lane remains the greatest of all time.
And also you mentioned this before, but the having John Constantine being the pariah role
Mhm.
I agree. That was a wonderful change, and it is a great way to tie it back to the previous. That was probably what I liked most about this, is the fact that this does all tie back together to the previous universe.
Yes. Yes.
And the fact that they had made a conscious effort to show that this was um this isn't just like another universe. This universe was created because of this other thing that happened, and then to show that it happened because because Darkseid was killed, that it ended up spawning the multiverse, was a really interesting concept. I thought so. Like, part one, I was kind of not feeling it so much. And then part two, had some good beats in it, like the Bat Family stuff we said, like the John
Mhm.
Constantine stuff, and the
Mhm.
Psycho Pirate stuff, but and also the Supergirl stuff with Harbinger. I thought that was pretty good too. But it was in between all, though, I was kind of like, whatever. I'm not really feeling this so much. But then when we get to part three and that explanation for what happened, I'm like, okay, you're kind of pulling me back in now.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I did not particularly care for the Apocalypse War stuff. I mean, at one point, I think my reaction was, what kind of superhero snuff movie is this? There's Bleak, and then there's whatever the hell this is. I just did not. A lot of people liked it, and more power to you. It was not my particular cup of tea. I bought the ticket, I took the ride. But at the end of it, I was just like, that's a thing that I never have to watch again. So, and then they teed this up, and then they got the Tomorrowverse off the ground, and I thought, oh, well, this is interesting. I mean, initially I slept on a couple of things, but getting to this point and having that pay off, having that very, very dark story lead to ostensibly this brighter universe, but the rot is still under the surface. Like this, the original sin has to be dealt with, which I thought was interesting. Like to make use of that dark story to tell this grand epic and to make it the springboard, because we can't do the bit from Crisis. We to try to explain Krona, the Guardians,
Mm-hmm.
the hand at the beginning of the galaxy. That would have been way too much of a road to hoe. I think that would have been too much for like some people to really like, okay, come on. How am I supposed to care about any of this stuff? This doesn't resonate with me. This isn't. So this one guy sees a hand and that makes everything evil. That creates evil in the galaxy. Pull the other, like, I get it. I get why they tied it to John Constantine and John's original sin. Makes a bit more sense. And the whole thing with
Mm-hmm.
Darkseid is this immutable point of evil. Like, that makes more sense because let's face it, the Monitor and the Anti-Monitor, they just kind of came out of nowhere in the 80s. They weren't like,
Mm-hmm.
there were no, like, it was just the piecemeal patchwork. We need someone to provide the exposition, and we need a big bad for them all to do the punchy, punchy run with. So making the anti-monitor essentially the antibodies of the universe, trying to solve the problem of the multiverse cascading out of control because of John Constantine, that was really interesting. And also making Darkseid a presence in the story by his very absence
Mm-hmm.
was an interesting idea. So very, very cool. And the stuff they did with the Legion too, where it's like the Legion and time travel and the future of the 31st century existed and then doesn't exist. Like they're like, oh well, we can solve this no problem. Let's just get Brainiac 5 out here. He'll solve it. And they drop the like time sphere that's supposed to open the portal and it just clunk, clunk, clunks because the multiverse is broken. Time travel is broken. The rules of the reality as we know them are breaking down. And I thought that was really interesting. And what they did with the bleed, which was a nice Jim Lee Wildstorm reference,
Mm-hmm.
was fun too. So I think they where they adapted faithfully, it was really good, and the changes they made sense to me. So
Yeah, I thought some of those changes were really interesting. I love the idea of using the bleed, because that is one of those cool concepts that came out of, I think Ellen Ellis created that, if I'm not mistaken, when he
I
was
think he
doing
did when he was
Stormwatch.
doing Stormwatch, and then it carried over into the
It
Authority
carried
because
over into Authority. Yeah,
that's where they find the carrier because the carrier is
yeah,
drifting around Earth in the bleed.
yeah. And I know the bleed has made appearances in the DCU since then too. So it was
Mm-hmm.
cool to see it pop up here. Um, and so yeah, I mean all that. I mean, and Apocalypse. I mean, dude, we find out that John Constantine fucked King Shark in that. So there's always that part of it too.
I mean, I don't look. It's just one of those moments where you're like, okay, okay. I don't know where I'm supposed to unpack this movie, but all right, sure. You do you, John. I am not here. I am not judging you.
Mhm.
I am not one to judge. So that was wild. And the whole thing of making weaponizing Barry
Mhm.
and turning him to essentially the plagues from the Prince of Egypt. That shit was wild. Like everyone he passes, they drop dead.
Mhm.
And and when John's like, well, and Batman's like, well, Barry wouldn't do it. He absolutely wouldn't because he's got that thing where he's doing the vibrating hand, and you think like, oh shit, dude, are you gonna? Look, I know it's
I
Baby
was thinking that too.
Darkseid.
I'm like, holy shit.
I know he's Baby Darkseid, but that's a baby. Like
It's
it's the
still a
whole
baby.
baby
Yeah,
Hitler.
emphasis
Yeah,
on the
yeah,
baby.
yeah,
Yeah.
on a baby. Like that's fucked up. Like,
I
but
was getting
Barry can't do it. Yeah.
did you see the super duper cut of Deadpool 2?
I don't think so. No,
Okay,
unfortunately.
so you can look up the ending later when you get on, but
Okay, yeah.
he go because when he's talking to Cable about time travel, he says, "Why don't you do something
Hmm.
useful like go back in time and kill baby Hitler?" So at the end
Hmm.
of Deadpool 2, he gets Cable's time travel device and he starts zipping through time and
Yep.
he kills the mouthless Deadpool from X-Men Origins Wolverine, and he tells Hugh Jackman, he's like, one day you hang up the claws, but one day your buddy Wade's gonna tell you to get back in the saddle and you're gonna say yes. So nice little Deadpool and Wolverine teaser there. And
Nice.
then he saves, he saves Vanessa obviously too. And then he
Oh
goes
yeah.
back in time to a hospital in Germany and he's gonna try and kill baby Hitler. And then the post-credit scene is him rocking the baby to sleep, and he's like, I can't do it, I can't do it. I'm gonna come back with my buddy Cable. He loves killing kids.
There's a great bit from I don't know if you follow a channel streaming service called Dimension 20. It's like basically like tabletop role playing stuff. There's a guy named Brennan Lee Mulligan, incredibly talented like comedy writer. He wrote a lot for Funny or Die and College Humor. He had a thing where it's just like, well, when time travel exists, everybody and their grandmother is going to be making a beeline to go back in time to kill Hitler. Like they're going to have to implement some kind of time police to be like, no, no, that whole period to Hitler's birth is completely jammed. Like you can't get to it. There's so many time travelers trying to go back. When something 40 years from now, maybe we can get you into a timeline where you can kill Hitler. But you're not gonna get to it. I'm sorry. Crazy.
But yeah, that the idea of like sending Barry in to kill him, and when his hand was vibrating, I'm just like,
Yeah,
holy
I
shit,
was
is
like,
Barry Allen gonna be more hardcore than Deadpool?
is Barry Allen gonna pull a Eobard Thawne? Is he gonna pull a killing Barry's mom? Like that's pretty wild. I mean, it is Baby Darkseid, and it's very visibly Baby Darkseid, which was
Mm.
hilarious. But yeah, that was a bit too much. But then when he leaves and the baby's nose starts bleeding, I was like, ooh, ooh, damn, John,
Mm.
you're cold, man. That was cold blooded.
Yeah, and I love that incorporating John Constantine, because one of the things I liked about the original, again, I keep saying the original, the last Crisis movie,
Mm.
was how John Constantine, when they traveled to a different universe, they traveled to the Lucifer universe, right? Lucifer knows him,
Yeah, yeah.
right? And
Lucifer,
he's been there
absolutely.
before.
Yeah.
It's not
Hmm.
a variant of Constantine knows. It's that one. So it's like
Hmm.
this is what I said back then. I'm like, I kind of like the idea of there being only one John Constantine in the multiverse, and he can kind of like move freely between all of them.
Yeah, and the whole bit with Dr. Fate, where like Dr. Fate exists across all points in the multiverse, and each Dr. Fate can converse with the other one. Like there's that whole moment where he's like talking to somebody off, like his head cants to one side. He's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I was just talking to myself." Like, just like, and the whole bit where he's no selling Psycho Pirate stuff, where it's just like, no, that's not going to work on me. There's too many of me for that to work on. So, it's great when he turns the tables on Psycho Pirate, which was quite fun. And then it's just like, well, I need you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you the power to move between worlds because you have a role to play in this. Dr. Fate, excellent use of Dr. Fate. He is
Mm,
just equal parts noble and creepy, which is what
mm,
Dr. Fate should be. Like you can't read his face. You don't know what's going on. You don't know where Dr. Fate's going to land, which I liked.
yeah. Yeah, and those things were great too. And
Mhm.
so what about and then we got this new monoverse created at the end, which Constantine and
Yes.
Spectre decide that
Yes. They're not
they're
going to
not
be a
going to go
part
in
of.
with it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That was the one bit of the movie that, as I mentioned at the top of the show, I was kind of not thrilled with. The idea that the multiverse was a mistake. That was the bit where
Hmm.
I was like, sir, pump the brake. Pump, pump the because this is another indicator of like DC's constantly playing footsie with the multiverse as a concept, like or heightened, or whatever you want to call it. Like, as I said at the top of the show, DC needs to pick a lane. Like
Hmm.
you're either all like you do away with all those toys or you don't. Because you have Jeff Johns bringing back the JSA, you have other creators bringing back the Legion. You have other creators creating Earth 2 version, like chiefly Jeff Johns, because Jeff Johns loves the JSA and wants to do what Jeff Johns wants to do. But yeah, like that whole notion of the multiverse being a mistake and being the result of this original sin where there was a universe with Darkseid, there was a universe without Darkseid, and that just metastasized into essentially a reality cancer. And the anti-monitors are the white blood cells trying to eliminate this threat. That was the one bit where I was like, nah, dog, that one's not sinking in because the multiverse itself is a fun idea. It's a fun idea to have worlds like, Earth 17, the post-apocalyptic Earth of the Atomic Knights. The Atomic Knights, my favorite Silver Age ridiculous shit. When they started riding in on those Dalmatians, I literally barked with delighted laughter. I was like, yes, yes, Gardner Grail and his ridiculous knights of the post apocalypse riding their giant mutant Dalmatians. Yes, please. That was clearly the writer going, thank you, Stacy. I appreciate you watching. And I was like, yes. But yeah, it's just a fun vehicle for stories and for storytelling. And it's a shame that they just periodically DC just gets like massive cold feet and just tries to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I mean,
Hmm.
Even Alan Moore, when he was like, "Yeah, man, when I wrote whatever happened to the Man of Tomorrow, I was so he essentially just says he pulled an Ian Malcolm. Like he was so keen on the could, he wasn't too mindful of the should. Like he threw out all the fun stuff about Superman in his mind. That's why he
Hmm.
wrote Supreme, the story of the year, because it's like let's bring all that fun craziness back. Let's bring like multiple versions of the character, like the Golden Age, the Silver Age, the Modern Age. Let's like give a gritty, like drug addicted Lois Lane analog who's talking with her fellow Lois Lane analogs in the Supremium or the Supremacy about how like Supreme Mouse Squeaks the Supreme Mouse and his duck girlfriend is also there talking about stuff like have fun with it. And that was the one part of it where I was like, a monoverse is fun, but I guarantee you're going to be like a year in before you like start smuggling in the JSA. So come on.
Well, I mean, even when the DC universe decided that there was no multiverse, they were still doing Elseworld stuff. So it's like the
Yes,
multiverse still exists. So
exactly.
yeah,
Like,
so I agree that part also didn't quite sit well with me because I didn't like this idea of the multiverse is an inherently bad concept.
mm,
Um, but I thought the idea of the anti-monitor being like these antibodies to because it can't handle this many universes. I thought that was a nice touch. I thought that
mm,
worked. I think we could have if we could have kept that but cut out the stuff about how we have to have only one universe, I think I would have been a lot more amenable to that. Um,
yeah.
and also, this is the final appearance of Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill as Batman and the Joker because
Yes.
Conroy
Yeah.
did this voice work before his death, and
Hmm.
Hamill has said he's like, I'm not doing it without Kevin.
Yeah, this was their last real duet together. Unfortunately, with my physical copy, it's very clearly a scratch actor. Like it's not Mark in my copy, the physical release, but they've corrected it in the digital release.
Hmm.
But yeah, it was him. It was nice to have them both come back. Um, the one note that I was kind of like, yeah, but you bring them back just in time for them to die. And their whole universes get destroyed along with the Super Friends, which I felt was particularly cold-blooded. And the Justice League of Justice League Unlimited, the entire DCAU essentially just blinks out of existence, which is kind of weird when you've got like Alan Burnett and Paul Dini and Ty Templeton doing Batman: The Adventures Continue, which is essentially year 5, 6, 7 of the animated series, and it's just like, well, which is it, boys? Which is it? Are you like, again, once again, pick a lane? And I think that a lot of that kind of rubbed me the wrong way, where it's just like, oh, these don't exist anymore to them, which I'm like, you would think that they would, if it were me, if I was backseat writing, which I would never ever do, I would just establish that they essentially reboot the multiverse, but they establish a stable number. 52, let's say. 52 Earths, like in Multiplicity. And a couple of them are recognized, a couple of them are unknown. We don't really know what's going on there, which kind of leaves future writers and creators a backdoor to make this particular Earth whatever they want it to be. It's kind of like in Multiversity. Grant Morrison, they had a great idea. They put in a couple Earths and just put question marks on them. Or it's just like, who knows what's going on in this Earth? Like,
Yeah.
anybody wants to fill it in, fill it in. But that's just me from the Chiefs. Yeah.
So now at the end, though, we do have this new monoverse with young Diana on Themyscira and playing on a cliff top, and Hippolyta says, even princesses aren't immortal.
Mhm.
What do you think about that ending? Do you think that this is just like kind of like a nice little joke to show that this is different from the Wonder Woman as before, or do you think this is like the first image of some new animated universe here?
It could be the first image of a new animated universe. I personally would have made it like a bit of like, as Crisis on Infinite Earths ended, they did Marv Wolfman and George Perez did the history of the DC universe, which is essentially, this is the new timeline, this is how everything makes sense. And it was essentially a coda to Crisis on Infinite Earths. There's a great edition out with the Alex Ross cover that features just about every damn thing from the new DC universe as of the post-crisis pre-Legends.
Mhm.
And I think that it would have been fun to kind of do a Lord of the Rings and just at least feature the Trinity. Like, you've got Diana playing in Themyscira, maybe a young Bruce Wayne and his parents, like on Christmas Day, and then they talk about, oh, we're just going to go to the theater and take in that Tyrone Powell revival. And then you got Clark on the farm, like discovering that he can lift the tractor. Like, they're all ready to go. Like they're safe. Their timeline is going to continue. They'll have a new iteration. But yeah, I think this is kind of like a hint of what they wanted to do, but at the same time, it's leaving things just vague enough that if James Gunn or anybody wants to jump in and do a new animated project, they can just do whatever they want. Mhm. Which I think was smart.
Yeah. I mean, on the one hand, it is kind of a bummer though that, because I think Jensen Ackles is like the perfect actor to follow up. Obviously Kevin Conroy is the perfect one, but
Oh,
I think
yes.
Jensen
He's the gold
Ackles is
standard.
he's a very worthy successor to that part. He loves the character, and I mean, if this is all we're getting with him, that's kind of a bummer. Although I'm still pulling that hopefully he'll get cast in the Brave and the Bold, but we'll have to see.
Yeah, that would be interesting to see him play Batman, although I think a lot of people are like, well, he's Soldier Boy now. And he's going to be Soldier Boy for a while yet. So people might not be able to fully reconcile that. But talented actor is a talented actor. I'm sure he'd be able to
Yeah.
shine. It'd be interesting to see what they do with that prequel series that they've got in Screw Boys. We'll have to watch that space. But yeah, the Batman's always had a great pedigree of voice actors. I mean, Conroy, um, Diedrich Bader, and then the young man who played the Batman, Reno Romano, did a great job in the Batman. So he's always had top shelf talent. And the new young man who plays him in Batman Cave Crusaders is doing a great job, kind of evoking the
Yeah.
feel of Conroy
Hamish
without doing
Linklater.
Conroy. Hamish Linklater, there he is. Kind of doing a riff on Conroy without necessarily doing a one-to-one, like Roger Craig Smith did when he voiced the character in Batman Arkham Origins, the game. So, but yeah, it'll be interesting to see what they can do with this. when they get
And
a
I don't know if
new
you mentioned Diedrich Bader in there, but he's been a great
Diedrich
job
Bader.
as like two
Mhm.
different versions of him. Like he did it in Brave and the Bold, and then the version he does on Harley Quinn is, very cool. He does
Funny,
like the
where
much
it's like, yeah.
funny and
Mhm.
but also a much darker version to it than the one in the Brave and the Bold. So
Oh yes, yes, he's very obviously the straight man in this one. Like he's even more straight man than he is in Batman the Brave and the Bold, where
mhm.
he's ostensibly the focused character in a room full of crazy people. Like it's the one where he's bouncing off Detective Chimp one week and John DiMaggio's Aquaman the next. So, which was a shame we didn't get to see the Brave and the Bold in there. I think they wanted to do more universes than that, but unfortunately the budget just wouldn't allow for it.
Right. Yeah. I think that's a pretty good note to end on. So, Stacy,
Mhm.
why don't you tell people where they can find you?
Oh, well, you can find me in a lot of places. Primarily, the easiest way to track me down is through Blue Sky. It's where I spend most of my time at Stacy HD. That's H as in Harold, D as in David, .bsky.social. You can also find me every week on the Fanboy Power Hour podcast, Fanboy Power Hour. You can just search it out in your podcast viewer of choice. And got a couple irons in the fire, an audio related one that I won't spill the beans on just yet, but it is in development, so it'll be fun. It's going to be a fan project based on a beloved 1980s franchise. That's all I'm going to say for now. So, yeah,
Very cool. And
be
as for
very fun.
us, superherocinephiles.com is the website, and Super Cinema Pod on on Instagram, Blue Sky, and Threads. So please make sure to check us out there. And what Stacey just mentioned, you'll be able to find links to those things in the show notes. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next time. Thanks for listening to the Superhero Cinephiles podcast. Superhero Cinephiles is produced by me, Percival Constantine. The show is created by myself and the late great Derek Ferguson, our host emeritus. Visit us on the web at superherocinephiles.com to listen to past episodes or find out how you can be a guest yourself. Support the show by visiting our advertiser links or click the Buy Me a Coffee link on the website to make a one-time donation. We are Super Cinema Pod on both Instagram and Blue Sky, so please be sure to follow us. We'd also appreciate if you could rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts and share us with your friends.
Thank you for listening. And as always, good night, good evening. God bless.